order. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 on the study of the report of the Bank of Canada on monetary policy, we welcome here before the committee today Stephen Polis, who's the Governor, and Carolyn Wilkins, who's the Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada. So welcome, and committee members, the Governor has provided members with copies of his remarks, and we appreciate that. Governor, the floor is yours, and then we'll go to questions. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to you and to committee members. Senior Deputy Governor Wilkins and I are delighted to be before you today to discuss the bank's monetary policy report, which we published just this morning. I'll just take a look back to the last time we were here, which is in October. At that time, I spoke about the factors that were causing us to downgrade our outlook for the Canadian economy. Well, 6 months later, I'm very pleased to say that I can discuss the factors that have led us to upgrade our forecast of the Canadian economy. So for some time, we've been talking about how the oil price shock that began in 2014 set in motion a complex series of adjustments throughout the economy, including a significant restructuring of the oil and gas sector. And what we're seeing now is that energy-related activity has stopped declining and is transitioning to a new level that is commensurate with the current level of oil prices. Now, because that large negative force is now essentially past, it's no longer masking the sources of strength that have been at work for some time, particularly the growth in output and employment that is being driven by the service sector. Now, the expansion over the past 6 months has exceeded our earlier forecasts, and we have revised up our outlook for average annual growth this year, 2017, to a bit over 2.5%. That's half a percentage point greater than what we were projecting in January in the monetary policy report. We project growth of just under 2% in 2018 and 2019. Now, a crucial question for the bank now is whether the stronger economic data that we've been seeing recently are signaling increasing momentum. Some of the strength is coming from factors that are unlikely to continue at the same pace. For example, the very strong growth in consumption in the first quarter was supported by a temporary boost from the Canada Child Benefit. Housing activity has also been stronger than expected. While we've incorporated some of this strength in a higher profile for residential investment throughout our projection, we're still anticipating a slowing over that projection horizon. The current pace of activity in the Greater Toronto Area and parts of the Golden Horseshoe region is unlikely to be sustainable given fundamentals. House price growth in the GTA has accelerated sharply in recent months, suggesting to us that speculative forces are at work. Now, in terms of the labour market, recent data have been more mixed. Job growth has certainly been firm, but both wages and unit labour costs have grown very slowly. The data suggests that material slack remains in the Canadian labour market, in contrast to the U.S. labour market, which is close to full employment. Now, at the same time, Canadian exports and business spending are still weaker than you would expect to see at this stage of the business cycle. Companies are telling us that while they plan to raise spending, the planned increases are modest or tied to maintenance rather than expansion. In short, the economy is not yet firing on all cylinders. In addition, Canadian companies are dealing with heightened levels of uncertainty related to U.S. tax and trade policies. We still do not know what tax changes are coming or when, and the range of potential trade measures under discussion is even wider now than it was in January. This list includes, first, a border adjustment tax, second, increased tariffs aimed at specific industries or countries, third, non-tariff barriers, and fourth, even broader multilateral measures. Nous ne savons pas lesquelles de ces mesures.
We do not know which of these will be enacted. Their timing is uncertain, and each would affect the global and Canadian economies through a different complex set of channels. With all of this uncertainty, we cannot reliably model the impact of changes to U.S. trade policy. Instead, we have built in an extra degree of caution in our forecast for exports and investment relative to our January projection. Total inflation has been close to 2% and is expected to dip to about 1.7% in the middle of the year before returning to near its target. However, our core inflation measures are all in the lower half of the target band and have been trending downward. This supports the view that the economy continues to have significant excess capacity. Our current base case forecast calls for the Canadian economy to absorb its excess capacity sometime in the first half of 2018, which is a bit sooner than we projected 3 months ago.
Economic data, and we want to see more of it in order to be confident that growth is on a solid footing. We judge that the economy still has material room to grow, and we remain mindful that significant uncertainty continues to weigh on the outlook. Given all of this, we judge that the current stance of monetary policy is still appropriate, and we maintain the target for the overnight rate at 0.5%. With that, Mr. Chairman, Senior Deputy Wilkins and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Governor, and we will turn to questions, and we will go to 5-minute rounds to try and give everybody a chance to get on. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for being here today. I want to start out by asking a question to a statement that was quoted in the media the latter end of last year in regards to saying that I think one of the most dangerous risks to the economy was the high household indebtedness. And if you believe that the recent federal measures will deal with that, or if you have any overall thoughts. We just completed a study on housing dealing or looking at high household indebtedness. So I wonder if you can perhaps elaborate from the time you made those comments, which I believe was last December, until now, if you've seen any trends of or if it's been working, the policy.
Of course. So that occasion in December was when we published our financial system review, which is a twice annual exercise. So the next one is in June. So we do it twice a year. And it's absolutely true that a major risk that we face is that the level of indebtedness in households is at the highest level ever and is continuing to move higher. This is closely associated with imbalances in the housing market because it's primarily in order to buy houses that that indebtedness is incurred. We are confident that the moves made by the federal government in that similar and about the same time frame are having the effect that was desired. What that means is that people are qualifying for mortgages at a higher rate now, and therefore have more of a cushion in the financing plan. Should there be perhaps if you like, an interruption of employment or a rise in interest rates, either of those could disrupt. There's more, if you like, resilience in the system and a growing amount as each new bit of debt is subject to those higher criteria. That's the primary change that's been made. From the Bank of Canada's standpoint, our primary mission being inflation targeting, what that implies, though, is bringing the economy back to full capacity, and that causes more jobs and growth of incomes, which, if you like, improves the denominator of the ratio of debt to income and makes the whole situation less risky.
Thank you. Changing subjects a little bit, but similar in the sense that I think in recent days, certainly in the media, the questions around rising interest rates and how much U.S. policy, monetary policy, will have an impact on us here in Canada. We have seen interest rates increase in the U.S. So I was wondering if, again, I understand the speculation, but how much of the U.S. monetary policy affects us here in those questions, especially around interest rates, because that's what the average Canadian is going to be worried about given this high indebtedness.
Sure. Well, certainly what people observe, and they've been observing for a very long time, is that the interest rates in Canada are highly correlated with interest rates in the U.S., especially the longer term those interest rates are. So at the 5-year rate, for example, which is the rate at which a lot of mortgage rates are based. And so as the Federal Reserve starts to tighten interest rates, we're going to quite naturally just import some of that rise, and in fact we have seen that. It's not a large amount, but over the last 6 months it's noted. Now, whether or not that's actually translated into mortgage rates is a question for the financial institutions that set them, and in fact they haven't. They've taken a little bit out of their margins rather than increase rates. I think for us, what it means, we have an independent monetary policy, and we set our interest rates commensurate with what we think we need to have to achieve our inflation target. And so if we're at a different point in the cycle, which we are right now, our interest rate paths are going to be different. But we do take it into account when we do our projections. So what the curve says, where the interest rates are, is exactly, and where we think U.S. growth is what we feed into our forecast.
Okay. So my quick question would be then just, you stated that, obviously we have independent policies, and I get that from the U.S., but the U.S. has determined that, or should Canada make maximum employment an explicit goal of the Bank of Canada like the U.S. has? Or does that also fall into a question of we're not at the same cycle?
Well, in fact, we see no inconsistency in this. For us, the inflation target being our goal, we need to achieve a position where we've achieved 2% inflation and that it is sustainably at 2%. Being sustainably at 2% would mean that there is no excess demand or excess supply in the economy pulling it down or pushing it up. And so there is, in effect, a coincidence that we would also be at maximum employment at that same time. And so for us, the two are not distinguishable. But I think that having purely an inflation target does improve the clarity of the decision-making that we have, because, of course, in the background, the economy is working through its adjustment processes. It's very difficult to have two targets with really only one instrument to aim at.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Turning to Mr. Deltel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, colleagues. Monsieur, Madame, soyez les bienvenus dans votre chambre.
Welcome to our House of Commons. A little bit of clarity. You talked about the cost of oil, which has been a huge concern over the past 4 years in Alberta, and we saw the terrifying results this produced. You said that we're now transitioning to a new price that is commensurate with the current oil prices. Does that mean that, in your opinion, over the next year, that the cost of oil is going to be stable, or do you predict that it will go up? What do you think the oil barrel will be? For us in the Bank of Canada, this is a challenge. It's always a challenge to forecast the cost of oil, but we make assumptions. This is a price that we feel will remain stable, and after that, there will be risks. For the time being, I would say, in the short term, there's the prices may go up. The price may go up because we are currently in an investment period, and eventually there's going to be a greater demand for oil. But at the same time, we have had some technological changes which are having an impact on supply. So currently, I'm not sure about the future or what the future holds, but I do think that it will be stable once the industry becomes stable. Thank you. You're talking about a possible hike in the price of oil. This would be difficult for Canadian companies that are dependent on oil. Before I go any further, if I may, I'd like to thank you, congratulate you for the quality of your French. We appreciate it very much. Now, interest rates. We're all a little bit nervous when we go into debt, when we have a deficit. We have been listening to a certain political discourse over the past year and a half, but do you think that the interest rates will remain stable, or do you think that there will be a fluctuation over the next few years? I can't give a forecast when it comes to interest rates. As we said today, we are essentially in a situation that is neutral, a neutral situation with respect to interest rates, meaning and in accordance with the forecast we gave this morning, we feel that there will be a 2% inflation rate during this period. And in the first third, there will be an output gap of, so today's interest rate is appropriate. And we have to look at the data on an ongoing basis to understand what the situation will be for the next few years. Very quickly, you said that the economy is not quite yet at full capacity, and you talked about the uncertainty in the United States. We know that the American president has talked about tweaking trade with Canada, but this may have a huge impact of Canada, as Moroni said 2 weeks ago when he was here in Ottawa meeting with a few federal ministers. In your opinion, what sectors are at the greatest risk in the Canadian economy if, in fact, these little tweaks or changes have a huge impact in Canada? What impact will it have on our overall economy? What we have seen today, and after doing our analysis, there are so many things that could happen. It's not easy to give a very precise reply to your question. What we've tried to do in the PMR is to look at how these changes would impact sectors in the Canadian economy. If there's a tariff, for example, the direct impact will hit those sectors that are directly involved, meaning that if the tariff is on certain industries, it will have a different impact throughout the country, and you can see this with the forestry sector right now. So there are other...
Quand il y a comme le choc de prix de pétrole, il y a des retombées qui touchent à des secteurs plus larges que ça. Et on voit qu'il pourrait y avoir des travailleurs qui ont besoin de déménager, trouver d'emploi dans d'autres provinces ou d'autres secteurs. On voit du capital qui va investir dans d'autres industries. Et ça, ces changements-là vont faire en sorte que c'est un autre ajustement qui pourrait prendre du temps et qui pourrait, en fin de compte, nous laisser avec un taux de productivité qui est moins élevé qu'on a en ce moment. Puis ça, c'est parce qu'il y a des chaînes de valeur mondiales ou des chaînes de valeur qu'on a bâties à travers toutes ces années de globalisation qui sont efficaces. Alors, si on commence à les défaire, on va finir pour avoir des chaînes de production qui sont moins productives. Alors, c'est pour ça qu'on dit que les effets, si ça arrive, pourraient être nettement négatifs. En même temps, c'est pas possible en ce moment d'être précis de comment exactement ça pourrait se produire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dussault.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you for coming here today. I'd like to ask a question that you may not be expecting today. Some observers and even economists have been saying for some time that the Bank of Canada's mandate changed, and now the Bank of Canada cannot lend money. I'd like to give you the opportunity to answer these queries that have been tossed about in the public debate, and the reason why the Bank of Canada does not no longer loans money, and this since 1974. There is a difference between what we have the right to do legally and what we do in practice. There's a good reason for having an independent central bank that has a target. We're accountable for what we do, and this is what we've chosen as a monetary framework is to focus on inflation, and this is an agreement that we've had with various governments over the past 25 years, and we've just renewed this mandate. We feel that it's the best way for the Bank of Canada to really promote macroeconomic environment that lends itself to investment, that's good for families, that's good for corporations. If we were to loan money directly to the government, well, that would change the mandate of the central bank in a way, well, that would lead to less clarity with respect to inflation that might hurt our financial stability in the long run. Thank you very much for your answer. Growth. You talked about the stagnation of salaries and labor force units. So you've said that there's only been a little bit of an increase. Could you tell us whether you feel that things will improve in the short term, and explain why salaries have stagnated over the past few years, and if the outlook is rosier and ahead? There are 2 points there. First of all, we have experienced slow growth since 2008, and throughout this time we had a production gap that was quite big, particularly in the labor force market, and that's why we've had this lengthy stagnation. But at the same time, we have seen oil prices drop just at the time when the economy was at full speed ahead. So that was a second shock, and that led to major adjustments in the economy, and it takes time to overcome this loss. We lost $60 billion every year in terms of revenue for the country. So that has an impact on the entire economy, not just people who have been directly hit. And for these two reasons, there is a downward pressure on the inflation rate and on the salaries. In our outlook or forecast, we foresee that in a year's time, in the first half of next year, that this production gap will change, and we're expecting that eventually there will be greater growth in salaries. But that's a symptom of progress, a sign of progress, rather. And clearly, expansion is not a sure thing. It's going to be unequal and as it unfolds. But we are forecasting that there will be stronger growth and more stable.
Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Governor and Senior Deputy Governor. Always a pleasure. Reading through the monetary policy report earlier today, well, this afternoon, I guess, two great things. Obviously, the stronger than expected growth, so you revised up this year's growth, and also the output gap closing earlier than expected. Although from reading it, I understand there's going to be some remeasurement or reexamination of how we look at how we measure output gap. One thing I wanted to just talk about quickly is exports and business investment. Those two points of contribution to GDP that haven't recovered as strongly as we would have expected from an economic crisis or in the cycle. So I was wondering, can you give us some more detail on what the bank looks at those two areas of contribution to the economy?
So I think these things pretty well go together. And so at the root of this is that during the strong dollar period followed by the global financial crisis and the global recession, we lost some 8,000 to 10,000 exporting companies that went out of business. And when the conditions for recovery were in place, the U.S. economy getting stronger and the Canadian dollar easing back, that combination would normally have produced a much stronger export recovery. And in fact, what happened was many of those companies were no longer there, and so they didn't respond to that stimulus in the way our models would have predicted. So we've been busy during this period, remodeling of the sector at a more micro level, and there's plenty of things in there to encourage us, sectors that are emergent and are growing faster. And so that's a good thing, and others that, of course, are not. Now, to go with that is the investment side. So that, what we were expecting was exports would grow to a point where companies were fully using their resources, and then they would expand through new investment. And that natural sequence has not really gotten underway for the reasons I've just said. Layer on top, if I may, one last thing is the cloud of uncertainty coming from south of the border, which is causing companies to hold back on those investments.
Of course. Just changing tangents to the regional housing market, and I say regional for a purpose. If you look at the GTA, which my understanding is probably growing at a 4 to 5% clip a year, you commented recently about some of the fundamentals supporting the actual housing market, but also with the caveat that you see levels of speculation. And, many of us hear it from our constituents all the time about the affordability or unaffordability, but mostly the unaffordability of housing in the GTA. You've also commented, Governor, and please correct me if I'm wrong, about some supply issues. If we were going to rank the reasons for the level of price increases we're seeing, what would you comment to that, if you can, or some color there, please?
Well, if we begin at the very most basic, a price change is always a question of demand or supply, or both demand and supply. So demand, as you say, has been growing in the GTA. The economy has been growing 4 to 5%. It's being fueled by immigration and job creation. That creates a very basic demand for more housing. Supply has been growing, but has not kept up with that demand. And so there's a natural tendency for prices to rise. Those are fundamentals. However, there's no fundamental story that I could tell that could justify price rises of 20 or 30%. And so without being specific about just how much of it is due to speculation, it's obvious to me that there's a growing amount that is due to speculative behavior, which means people buying houses not to live in, but to flip them, etc. And so for investment purposes. So that, of course, is a more risky phase of any cycle. It means that it's time to remind people that house prices can go down as well as up, and that they should be doing their own risk assessment, like fundamentally, why am I buying this house? Could I withstand, say, a 10% correction in prices, which many ordinary people could. They would just continue to pay their mortgage and live there. But the speculators would not be able to, and so it's financially risky.
Yep. Mr. Chair, do I have time for one more?
No, we might get back to you later. Mr.
Thank you.
Elvis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our guests for being here and the work you do for Canadians every day. I'd like just to touch upon, again, obviously we're in a period of divergent policy where you have the U.S., and I do take the point of the Senior Deputy Governor that while the Bank of Canada is an independent institution, I think many people also would cite the equally true fact that we're in an interdependent and integrated economy with the Americans. We're holding steady with interest rates, at least. I'm not going to ask you to comment on where that might go, but what does that mean in practical terms for our dollar, et cetera, if the Americans are going up? What have your modeling shown?
So it's true that the Canadian and U.S. economies are highly integrated, and we're to lesser degrees integrated in lots of economies. But the one sort of disturbance that breaks that integration is the one we came through, which is the oil price shock. So the decline in oil prices is fundamentally good for the U.S. economy because it's a net importer of oil, and fundamentally negative for the Canadian economy because we're a major net oil exporter. And so what that causes is a divergence between the two economies, and that's why our progress in reducing our unemployment rate stopped at the time of the oil price shock, and the U.S. progress in reducing theirs actually picked up speed. And so their economy has reached full employment far before we have. So that's a divergence in levels or point in the cycle, not necessarily of growth rates. So in that context, it's very important that we be clear that we are conducting independent monetary policy. We can't just follow the U.S. because if we did, we would for sure undershoot our inflation target because we would have excess capacity. And so that just means, though, that's one of the reasons why we have a flexible exchange rate, is to give us that policy independence. If we had a fixed exchange rate, we wouldn't have any.
So on the point, though, on again, we have floating currency, and of course you've said that your earlier models may not have told the complete story. Lower dollar, you would think higher exports. That has not happened. I think that's partly due to the permanent loss of production capacity. So in regards to that, for example, agri-growth, the chair talks about agri-food as being a leading process. A farmer can choose to plant another acre or not. It's very firm decisions that can happen. For someone to expand or build a new plant, there's a lot more processes that go into that. Does the Bank of Canada expect Canadian exporters will reinvest in production capacity as a result of the low Canadian-U.S. exchange rate? And what other federal measures could help them to increase their production capacity?
So there are many sectors that are actually responding, as the textbook would suggest, to the lower dollar. It was primarily in the manufacturing sector where we lost those 8,000 to 10,000 firms, and so we are getting classic responses across the economy. And an example is the food business, which is very strong, and another one is IT services, a very big growing business, or tourism, furniture. So there are classic examples. And so we're confident that that process is working as it normally does. It's just proving to be more slow than in the past, and it will rely on the creation of new businesses as we go through time to fill in the room that's been left behind by a smaller energy sector.
Okay, thank you. Just in regards to, we were talking about house indebtedness, or I should say household indebtedness, because often people associate mortgage debt with household debt. And household debt is obviously in a more expansive term, which could include mortgage. So is there a risk in the non-mortgage sector, because the government has already taken very draconian efforts in that division? Do you see that there are other actions that are necessary or would be helpful in order to limit risk when we're talking about overall household indebtedness?
No, the vast majority, I'm afraid I don't have the statistics in front of me, but the vast majority of household indebtedness is because of mortgages, not of consumer debt. There is, of course, automobile debt and other, so that exists. I don't want to dismiss it. And in some of that respect, there are some warning signs, such as lengthening term on car loans, for example, and people going into negative equity on their car loans and that sort of thing. And so there are some issues there which are symptomatic of risk. But the lion's share of our concern is interrelated with the housing market. Either way, household debt, we generally think of it as one thing because it is actually quite commingled, and it is high. But I want to make one last comment before the chair stops me, which is that as the stock of debt as a share of our economy rises, it's usually not because of individuals becoming more indebted. It's usually because of individuals with no debt becoming indebted for the first time, buying their first home in particular. And so given the new requirements that have been put in place, what we know is that the stock of debt is becoming more sustainable as time goes on because of those new rules.
Thank you both. Mr. Fergus.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Governor and Senior Deputy Governor, for the quality of your French. That's wonderful, and I must commend you for the work you do. So the Canadian Academy is doing well. I think I can speak on behalf of all of us when I talk about the positive impact that the bank has on our political situation. But that's not your concern. My question is, you mentioned in your opening, in your report on the Canadian economy that was released today, that the economy has performed well in part at the end of 2016-2017 because of the child benefit. Could you give us a brief overlook in the language of your choice about the impact of this program on the Canadian economy, and how do you see things unfolding in the months to come? The impact of this program is to increase the disposable income of the parents, which means that the parents, once they've made the decision to spend the money or to save it, or they may choose to pay down their debt. And we had forecast that households would be doing both. They would be spending a bit, but saving a bit. And that's exactly what we saw. Perhaps the impact was more concentrated than we originally thought, but this type of change does have does lead to a one-time boost in the level of income, and this will remain for unless the data continue to rise. The impact on growth will disappear. And it's a one-time effect, which is a very good thing, but that won't continue on a sustained basis if the amount that's given under this program remains the same.
Effect that the Canada Child Benefit has in that one time, so it just sort of puts us
I must confess that I don't have the figures. Do you have the? It's about 50%. They spend about 50% on average. It goes back to the question regarding household debt rates. This is quite a serious problem, and I know that you're trying to strike a good balance so that we have rates that will boost Canadian economy within a certain percentage rate. And it seems that you continue to do this work. You continue to do this since the fall, But my question to you is, we have bank rates that are historic. How can we ensure, how do we adjust this policy rate to ensure that Canadian households don't go further into debt, but we don't want to snuff out economic growth at the same time, because we know that it's because of this indebtedness that people are spending, and that creates economic activity? That's a really complicated question. And in all honesty, there's just one instrument, and that is the policy rate. Question has a lot of aspects to it, but our primary goal is to focus on the inflation rate. And hence, if we have a stable inflation rate, if it's under 2%, that means that the rest of the economy is in balance. So we did reach the maximum rate. So this is an objective that directs the rest. Everything follows from that. But the debt situation, that is another situation. And this has been going on for a long time, and people have been accumulating more and more debt. And something that we can do to contribute to that is to have a balanced economy. And as for the rest, that will take some time.
Thank you, Governor. I just want to follow up a little bit on my colleagues' questions around the dollar. And I recognize that there are so many things that you put into the hopper and it kind of stirs around and comes out the other end. But is there, for the economy to continue to grow, do you have any sort of level of what is an appropriate level for the dollar? Is 75 cents, as it is today and has seems to have hung around there for the last couple of years, is that in your view sort of an appropriate level?
So we don't form a view in the way you describe. In fact, the Canadian dollar is most correlated with the price of oil because of the importance of oil in the economy. And so when the price of oil was around $100, the Canadian dollar was in the 90s and actually around 100. So, we have models which try to capture the historic relationship between oil and the dollar, and it does have some other things in it, other commodities, not just oil, but other commodities matter, and the interest rate differential between Canada and the U.S., that matters. But that's about it. It's a pretty simple model of how the exchange rate is determined. But in real life, everything that moves affects markets' estimate of what interest rates will be someday, because it interacts with what inflation will be. And what that means then is anything that moves can affect the dollar because it changes that expectation. And in economist models, really anything that moves in the model, the exchange rate reacts to it. It makes it very hard to ever form a view of what is the appropriate level. It all depends on what are the forces acting on the economy at the time. And so there simply is no hard and fast rule. And as I said earlier, that's exactly why we have and why we need a flexible exchange rate, because we can't be forcing it to be somewhere or expecting it to be somewhere. So many other forces can act on it. And we need to focus on something which is of general use, and that is the inflation rate, which thereby clarifies decision-making both for businesses and for households. That's something that they can count on, that we're going to keep inflation close to target.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with anything you've said. I just think that if we took some of your modeling that you talked about today, which I don't, again, disagree with, the $50 oil or whatever the modeling we're sort of based on, but we've got a number of warning signs from the U.S., everything from increased interest rates. I don't even think that's a warning sign. I think that's a given. And we've pretty much indicated we're not going to go there. whether it's a border tax or whatever it is, all of these things that are likely coming at us is going to continue to put pressure on the Canadian dollar. At least that's the common belief it's going to put. Would you agree with that for starters? And then if that is the case, and I recognize I started my question with if, but if that is the case, where do we get to in the point of the dollar if the dollar happens to get, is a 65-cent dollar good for the country or not good for the country? I just wanted to get a bit of there's always been the belief that, a low dollar drives manufacturing exports, but as we've discussed, it has to a degree, but not to the degree that could offset the dollar from the oil prices. So I'd just like to get a sense from you on primarily the external factors from the U.S.
Okay, so in the U.S. Case, everybody in the marketplace knows that the U.S. economy is at full employment and that they have begun to normalize interest rates. And everybody also knows that the Canadian economy is in a different spot and that we're likely to strike an independent course. And so those two appreciations I shouldn't use the word, those two understandings are built into the marketplace and are in the prices that we see today. So, assuming that those two things unfold as people expect, I would not expect large movements in the Canadian dollar. But if something else changes, the price of oil, for example, then it would. So it's why we can't make some sort of firm prediction. It's really the market that drives it. And we appreciate that because the market sees everything and all those transactions, billions of transactions, are driving the dollar around. So it would be wrong for us to try to offset those things. So finally, is a low dollar always a good thing? Well, it is selectively good. It is good for a company that has mostly Canadian content in their business. That would be like, say, in agriculture, but not necessarily because equipment may be imported. Yeah. So we're always hearing from companies that it's a two-edged sword, isn't it? And so there is no simple case for low or high dollar. It's driven around by these forces.
Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, we've recently had a number of foreign companies in the oil sands sell off and indicate they're not going to continue operating the oil sands. Does that pullback of investment give you any concern?
No, it doesn't give me any concern. I don't. In fact, I see strong international interest in Canada as an investment destination, and it's been enhanced actually in recent months, I would say. And so I think of that as purely a sectoral decision, a global company which has multiple opportunities to deploy capital and has reassessed their situation. So I don't think of it as a nationality thing in any way.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Mr. Graywell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Governor and Deputy Governor, for being here. Really appreciate it. There was an article in the Globe and Mail just before you sat down that said that you were commenting on speculative risk in the Toronto housing market. This committee studied housing, and it's about to present a report to Parliament. And the question on housing is that it's obviously a regional problem, that there's different issues in different parts of the country. But my neck of the woods in Brampton, it just kind of gotten out of hand, where in Brampton East, the month-over-month price is like $30,000 increases. And it's very much of a speculative nature, where people own 4 or 5 homes. What type of risk does this present to the Canadian economy? And in your opinion, would an interest rate hike help slow down the speculative nature of the housing market?
Okay. Go.
Well, we've discussed this at length in the financial system review, and what we see is that a combination of very elevated prices that may not be make so much sense if you look at fundamentals, combined with a large amount of debt, and not just aggregate debt. I mean, if you look at the different neighborhoods where prices are high, you see that the people who are living there and have the mortgage debt there are also the most indebted. They may have debt-to-income ratios over 450%. And so that combination creates a vulnerability that we've talked about. And we call it a vulnerability because what it needs is a trigger to make that vulnerability turn into a risk that's materialized and of course be a big drag on the macroeconomy, depending on how big it was and how widespread it was. And then you know, in the worst case, you know, an issue for financial stability. And of course, if you've read our FSR, you know that that would take a really, really big event for it to get to that point. So yes, we think about it, but the factors that you talked about that are leading to these you know, big price increases often are not treated as well as they could be by an increase in interest rate, because an increase in interest rate would affect the whole country and areas and provinces, whole provinces where this isn't an issue at all. It's quite a widely spread instrument when we use it, and it's very effective. At the same time, you can look to other policies that are actually much more effective and more targeted, and we saw some of them in action last year in Vancouver. And so I think another point that we've made is if you think that you're investing and you're going to get 20 or 30%, it's not clear to us that raising the interest rate, you know, a difference of an interest rate of 50 basis points or 200 basis points is really going to change your mind on a rate of return that's really that lucrative. And so, and you combine that with the fact you look at our credit numbers, they're actually not, it's not a credit-driven price cycle at this point at all. And so I would say that the monetary policy tool would be the wrong one at this point.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments on that. You mentioned debt-to-income ratios for Canadians. There's obviously a lot of concern when Canadians are stretching themselves a bit too thin. And it's happening a lot from our neck of the woods, at least, is that if a middle-income family has a home in Brampton East that they probably bought for $550,000, $600,000, that home might be worth $1 million. And that's only in the last 4 or 5 years. Now they've taken out the equity and put down a deposit on 2 or 3 homes. At the same time, they have 2 SUVs, which they have financing terms on, and they might have a kid in college or university who's also, they're paying tuition. To me, this is the biggest risk to the housing market because people are then going into the secondary market to close on these deposit that they've made in these homes that haven't been built yet in order to close on the mortgages, and they're paying 12-13%, and we don't have the data to show, and that never shows up on your debt-to-income ratio. In your report, you mentioned that it would be catastrophic in order to get to that point. Like, we're so far off from a housing crash, but in certain regions, if that was the scenario, would that not present legitimate risks for the Canadian housing market? As in, if something happened in Brampton or Toronto, wouldn't there be ripple effects all across the country?
It's difficult to speculate when something happens is a very general term, and so I'm not. You know, I think that how much it would ripple across. I mean, it would be very unfortunate for the people in that area, and so I don't want to minimize that at all. So what we've seen when you look at past housing price cycles is how much contagion there is depends on a couple of factors. One of them is just how big the price adjustment is in that particular area and how important that area is to the rest of the economy. So if it's relatively small, then contagion is probably a low risk. But if it's quite large, and particularly in an area like the GTA, which is in Brampton, I would say that the chances are higher that there would be contagion to other markets because it would affect price expectations in other markets. So and so it really would just depend. Now, whether or not that led to a very large macroeconomic cycle, so a recession, and would again depend what else was going on in the environment. So if the economy was still growing and benefiting from growing growth in the U.S., that would be one case. If at the same time there were some negative event from outside that kind of amplified that price adjustment, then it could create some macroeconomic problems.
Thank you both. We'll have to stop it there. Mr. Dussault, down to 3 minutes.
Merci,
We'll be back
Monsieur
to
le
you for
Président.
5.
Et, j'aimerais revenir.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the issue of the dollar. In my reading, in Sherbrooke, we're very close to the U.S. border. Do you, with your model, do you think that the Canadian dollar will be relatively stable with respect to the value of the American dollar? No. We are not making a forecast with respect to the Canadian dollar. In our forecast that we released today, we made an assumption that the dollar will remain stable during this forecast period. As I said earlier, there are a lot of factors that must be taken into account. And in all honesty, if we were to give a forecast, that may have an impact on the currency market, and it wouldn't behave on a normal basis. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have a forecast or data on this issue, but the fact that we're now dealing with an aging population, we are hoping that people have enough savings for their retirement, but we do have data that shows that not in fact quite the opposite. Not enough people are saving for their retirement. What danger does this pose to the Canadian economy? And here I refer to newly retired people who have not saved enough money, and they will not be able to be active consumers on the market as a result. We look at the savings rate throughout the economy, the total savings rate. That's about 5%. But when we look at the savings of older people, there's quite a varying distribution. Some people find themselves in a situation where they need to work a little longer. So we haven't really delved very deeply into that question. But as far as the labor force is concerned, the participation of older people is something we're witnessing now. People are deciding to work longer than they have in the past. With the data that we have, it's difficult to say whether they're doing this because they're in better health or because they need to do so for financial reasons.
Minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Chair. C'est gentil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming here today. The Bank of Canada is responsible for the fiscal, financial management and monetary policy.
And the Bank of Canada, if there was a major disruption in our economy, for instance, not the American economy, but our own economy, if there was some large unemployments, what would you be able to do supplementary to what you're already doing with a low interest rate in order to get more people back to work, for instance?
Well, the tools of economics have not really changed all these years. We would have the ability. In fact, Canada is in a strong. The federal system is in a very strong financial situation, able to deploy fiscal tools in order to stimulate the economy. On the monetary side, we're at already a very low interest rate, so that would be of some concern that we would start with a low.
So that would be something that would be excluded because we're already at a low interest rate?
No, I'm not. I'm just finishing my thought.
Okay,
no,
sorry.
I would not exclude it because we've actually studied this carefully. We've been through a phase where many central banks have been had their interest rates at what we thought was the lowest possible level, and have actually worked with interest rates below zero to good effect. So Europe, for example, is turning around nicely now, and that's in part product of negative interest rates, whereas there was very little by way of fiscal expansion. So that's to say there's some room to maneuver on the monetary side, and probably more room to maneuver on the fiscal side. And moreover, we're in a state of the economy where fiscal policy has a greater impact because.
So what do you mean by the
interest rates
fiscal
are.
policy? Could you explain that a little bit more?
What do I mean by fiscal policy? That would be programs such as the infrastructure program, spending federal dollars on investments that promote longer-term economic growth, as well as creating employment in the short term.
So what would happen if we're already doing all that and we had a major disruption in one important sector,
right?
Saw a lot more unemployment
in just
we
one
did see
sector.
Oil prices going up. Like, what could we increase our infrastructure spending?
Yes.
Hypothetical situation, but
Very
what would you
hypothetical.
counsel?
Yeah, so the answer would be, especially if it's in a particular region or a particular sectorally based shock, then fiscal policy is much better able to target, geographically an area where more assistance is needed, or to customize the EI program or other things to help in a particular sector. Whereas monetary policy, as Ms. Wilkins was saying earlier, is generalized across the entire economy.
So EI could be an important tool extending the period for certain sectors in order to help out those sectors that are suffering?
Well, we're getting very hypothetical, and I'm here to talk about monetary policy, but I'm just saying that fiscal policy would be the suite of tools that would be more effective given that interest rates are already very low.
Okay. What would happen, so if we brought our interest rate lower and the United States climbed higher, what would be the impact on the Canadian dollar?
Well, it would depend on what else was going on. As I said before, many forces acting at the same time. But if that was the only thing that changed, most models would predict that the Canadian dollar would depreciate further in the situation you're describing.
And do you believe that would help out with the manufacturing industry in any substantial way in what we've currently seen in the past, Ms. Wilkins?
Well, as I said before, it may, but it would be sector specific. And in many cases, it's a lower dollar doesn't bring benefits of the sort you have in mind. In other sectors, it does. So it would change the distribution of growth through the economy.
I was just
last question.
Last question. I was just wondering, has the Bank of Canada been looking at the impacts of automation might have in certain job markets and the impacts it might have in the Canadian economy?
Well, not specifically, but perhaps you'd like to say something about it because you've.
So I've been thinking about it a little bit, and I'm planning to speak on it next week. So that's why I smiled.
Oh, that's wonderful. So ça marche super bien. That's great.
So clearly, we updated our potential output this time. We do it every year, and when you do that, you need to take a view on productivity. And one of the things you hear a lot about with automation is just how much potential there is to get enhancements in productivity, and so. Now, of course, we haven't factored any of those into our shorter-term productivity growth because this is a longer-term question. But it does raise the issue of what that means for employment and what that means for the distribution of income. So I'm going to talk about it a lot more next week. But it's something that, for the Bank of Canada, our work in this area is in early days. It's very focused on the issues that are relevant for a central bank. So the transmission of monetary policy is one example of that. But it's something that's on our radar for sure.
Thank you both. Just I'll turn to Mr. Albas in a minute. I have a couple of questions, and we'll come back here for one more on the government side. Just before you start, Dan, just a couple I had myself. It relates to the discussion just on with Robert. We did a pre-budget report called Creating the Conditions for Economic Growth. And I think it's fair to say we'll be kind of building on that theme as we look forward to pre-budget consultations for next year. Some people have suggested that productivity should be part of that focus. So we'll be interested to see what you have on productivity. My question to you really is. You've mentioned that fiscal policy could be part of a suite of policies that might help in terms of economic growth. Do you have any other suggestions in terms of enhancing economic growth? Maybe it's beyond your purview, but productivity is certainly one. But
so just to be clear, the question that was posed was there something bad happened in the Canadian economy? What tools would we use to try to create more employment? And the question you're framing, I think, is a little bit different, and so I'll answer it differently. So there, I think what you want to look for are things that we call the third leg of the policy suite, which is structural policies. These are policies that are, in effect, intended to enhance the ability of the economy to grow, usually by removing impediments to growth rather than somehow trying to boost them. And so, but a good example would be CETA, and another one would be CFTA. So these are explicitly designed to remove impediments to business growth and job creation. And often the case with structural policies, they're literally free money. It's not like it costs money to do those things. It's changing rules or adapting programs that already exist so that they're more effective. And then what happens then is you're able to, let's say you do something which enhances labor force participation of women. Well, that increases the labor input for the economy, and that increases the potential output of the economy, gives us more room to grow, and that would be a structural policy, not fiscal per se, and it's certainly not monetary. Working in much the same way as a free trade agreement works to enhance the ability of the economy to grow on its own. And there is no end of examples that one could come up with.
Thank you for that. I think that gives us some food for thought for our fall hearings. And the last question I have, I think the elephant in the room in terms of our economy is, and you mentioned it in your submission, where the United States may go on it, both on its trade policies, border adjustment tax, etc. Do you, on a kind of a trilateral basis or global basis, do you have discussions with the U.S. Federal Reserve, and do they talk about how dangerous some of those policies might be to the North American trading relationship, and how it might affect all three countries that are in NAFTA in terms of going forward? I chair the Canada-U.S., and that's partly why I asked the question, because what happens south of the border and the great uncertainty that's there now could really have an impact on our economy and theirs going forward.
So the central bankers meet every 6 or 8 weeks, and that would include Mexico and the United States, but the whole world at the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland. So we have a very almost a continuous dialogue about these kinds of issues. But in addition, we meet those people meet together with the finance ministers at the G20 or G7 meetings. A little less regularly, but that's, and I would say that there's a pretty strong consensus around the things that you're mentioning, that much of the world's progress over the last, actually I argued in a speech a couple of weeks ago, 150 years for Canada, all the periods of growth and prosperity have been ones you could characterize as open to trade, open to capital, and open to immigration. And so all of the periods in which we were not open were actually very distressed periods here in Canada. So it's an easy correlation to see. And so the last time we went closed, for example, was just prior to Confederation. And Confederation and the free trade agreement that was applied in it was actually a response to the closing of international markets. So it's any port in the storm. So in the end, I think there is a strong consensus around these things, and I'm hopeful that as we have dialogue and understanding grows, that many of these things that we hold dear are preserved.
Thank you very much for that openness and that answer, Mr. Albus, and then Ms. Taylor.
Great, and thank you again, Mr. Chair. And just a compliment on the new $10 bill and the Konami Code. I thought that was quite witty coming from that generation. And I used the code on the chair earlier, but he wouldn't double my time. So, yeah, he says it doesn't work on older systems unless they're Japanese.
Okay.
Anyway. So I just wanted to ask a few things. First of all, I'm glad that you were, through your statement here today, that you addressed that it was American trade protectionism that is a worry, because the first half of the report just mentions trade protectionism in itself, although there are pockets of some of it in some other parts of the world as well. So again, I know it's a difficult discussion, and I'm not really going to go there further because I think we've explored as far as we can go. I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the bright spots you've identified, though, one of them being services. Could you just explain, in the report it says that services are showing some potential. Can you give us an idea, are the breakouts that you have, the aggregate industry, is there any breakouts as far as which provinces or which industries have shown a bright spot for services?
Indeed. Let me just offer a few broad comments, and I think Ms. Wilkins may have a few details. But in fact, I gave a speech on this at the C.D. Howe Institute back in the fall, so there's a whole speech on our website about where the sources of strength are. And just mention a couple highlights, but the important thing here is that the economy is already transitioning into a much higher percentage of services as opposed to goods. And that's primarily because the highest productivity, the new machinery, the new technology makes the goods sector more efficient, and that allows, and you have supporting businesses being created in the service part of the economy, and they're the ones that are actually very global and conveniently highly Canadian content, and so they benefit the most from a lower Canadian dollar. So the situation is very strong for that sector at this time. And so the examples that are really moving hard are IT services in particular, and these are very well-paying jobs. Tourism is a big one. Education services is another big one. Universities, healthcare services, another big one. And so what do I miss?
You have missed motion picture and sound recording, which is, you kind of get into a lot of industries that, as a share of the total economy are small, but there's just so many of them that they add up to quite a bit in quite an important way.
One of the challenges that I have as an MP is where you'll talk to people about services, and they obviously think, fast food industry, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. However, what we're talking about here usually are like you said, services that actually can be exported now. Some of our new free trade agreements actually include services. Do you think that those are being tracked well enough? Are you getting enough information to be able to track services overall?
For the most part, we are. One of the reasons why services are given less profile in the media and just in general conversation is because in the trade data, there are only each quarter we get the data, whereas the monthly report is only about goods. So that I know is something Stats Canada is working on to improve. But imagine if the report every month included all the services, I think we'd all chat about what's going up and what's strong and so on. Whereas when the quarter comes, well, we get the national accounts, everybody's excited about that, and services are kind of in taking a back seat, whereas they actually should be in the front seat. And so, but I'm confident that they're doing everything they can to improve that. But for us, it's about those longer trends anyway. It's not a month-to-month thing that matters.
No, but again, when I go to some of these mills, they may be using German or Scandinavian equipment, but it's been reprogrammed by Canadian IT, and it actually makes them more efficient. Exactly. And they get better, real-time service. So anyway, there's a couple other things I would love to talk about, but I think that covers most of it today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albus. Ms. Petbot-Taylor.
Just a very quick question. During the course of the afternoon, you've been asked several questions with respect to the high level of household debt in Canada, and you've made reference that a big part of that is related to mortgages and household. So my question is, at one point you indicated the stock of debt is more sustainable. Could you just elaborate a bit more on that, please?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is that the quality of the outstanding stock of debt is improving through time because of the changes that the government put in place. So if today there is this much debt, the person who goes into the bank tonight and negotiates a mortgage has to qualify at a higher rule level. And so when they get their mortgage, that adds to the stock of debt, but we know they're more sustainable than someone who qualified for a mortgage, say, a year ago or 2 years ago. So that's the sense I mean. It's a little more resilient because they have to qualify at a higher interest rate, which means if interest rates were to go up in the way we described, that U.S. interest rates go up and 5-year mortgage rates drift up, well, they're already prepared for it because they've already qualified at that higher rate.
Thank you.
Mr. Sabero has one question, and that will close our discussion. Mr. Sabero.
Very quickly, the budget that we recently rolled out, I've described it as in a budget focusing on skills training, infrastructure, innovation, and just focusing on the lifelong learning aspect or skills training. You've noted in your opening remarks or comments about wages and unit labor costs being depressed. And we've had an exogenous shock with oil prices and the implications of that price shock on wages and income levels in Canada. And now looking at how we get wages rising again through productivity. And I think the budget rolls out that. So I'm not asking for you to opine on the budget, but I am asking what the importance of lifelong learning for Canadians is and skills training to make sure our workforce is ready.
So I would fit this into the segment I talked about with the chair, which is structural policies, which can be very powerful because they enable the economy to grow on its own force by removing impediments. So one impediment would be that when somebody loses their job, they're not able to transition into another job easily. Say, oil workers, that were laid off in the course of the oil price decline. And so investing more into that fluidity between sectors and the ability to, in effect, learn throughout one's career, through one's lifetime. Many of us, like our kids, are doing jobs that none of us imagined would be jobs. How could we predict that and help them choose the right courses in university or whatever to prepare for that? These days, it's more about preparing to be smart and adaptable than about learning specific things. And I think if companies were prepared to do more under the right sort of arrangements on the job type of training, apprenticeship type of programs in a wider array of fields, we could capitalize on smart people who are ready to adapt. We can't just rely on schools to give us turnkey resources in a world that's changing so fast. And so I believe the kinds of tools that you talk about can be very important to releasing the capacity of the economy.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we will thank you, Governor, Senior Deputy Governor, and committee members. Meeting adjourned.